Welcome to the Philosopher's Games and a new episode of Guesstimating. It has been quite some time since the first Dark Souls 3 DLC, Ashes of Ariandel, released at the end of October, and we have still no news about the second DLC, which is a bit strange considering that the 3 Dark Souls 2 DLCs had only about 1 month between the next DLC release, but we come to that later. First of all, I want to share some thoughts on the second DLC's potential content. Keep in mind that this is pretty much a wild guess, but of course I include what we know so far and try to be as analytical and plausible as possible. Also, this video includes spoilers and was recorded before any official announcement. But let's start. From my perspective, there are only 3 very general concepts possible for the second DLC. First, it directly continues the first DLC in the same world. This is a somewhat unlikely possibility. It would not only potentially handicap people who want to play the second DLC but not the first one, but also break with the tradition of DLCs that are pretty standalone in Souls, even though our sample size is not that big. We only have the 3 Dark Souls 2 DLCs and know that Bloodborne's 1 DLC was originally planned to be 2 DLCs, but here we don't know exactly where they would have split it. Maybe after the Maria fight and then fleshed out Fishing Hamlet a bit more. But of course, this approach is not impossible. What speaks for it is that the story of the first DLC is very open-ended and there are still so many questions unanswered that a direct continuation is not unreasonable at all. Second, it continues the story but takes place in a different world. This is far more likely. As mentioned, Ashes of Ariandel is a bit open-ended. You could assume they continue the story and answer some questions during the second DLC, but do it in a new setting. Third, it's not at all or only loosely tied to the first DLC and is pretty much its own thing. This is also quite likely. I feel the Dark Souls 2 DLCs were loosely tied together and just shared the crown concept and an abstract background story, but were not direct continuations. They all worked pretty well as standalone DLCs, but collecting the crowns bound them somehow together and gave you an incentive to buy all the DLCs and see what happens if you find all of them. Of course, you could argue that it maybe falls more under point 2, but I would at least slightly disagree. When Ashes of Ariandel was announced, there were all kinds of speculations about the story, and it was fun, but when we finally got to play it, it was not that much, to be honest. Everything was typically Dark Souls, very vague. And maybe a bit more. I often felt that way when it comes to Dark Souls lore, and I think they will continue this tradition. So, in my opinion, the next DLC will be pretty standalone and loosely tied to the first DLC, but nothing more. We probably don't find out what is going on with Velka and how she is related or connected to Priscilla and Yorshka. To make it stand-alone and differentiated more, they won't revisit a snowy world, but explore something totally different, a totally new setting. And this is my prediction for the second DLC's concept. The next question would be, what are possible settings? This time it takes From Software quite some time to make the DLC, which is maybe a hint on something very work intensive. The highly increased graphic fidelity of Dark Souls 3, which increases the development time, is of course also a factor to consider. In addition, this DLC, even though still good, wasn't received at the same level as previous DLCs and maybe motivates From Software to amp up their game. So I could imagine that they come up with a totally new setting and not re-explore an old one again. And this leads me to a small list of possible settings. Maybe they come back to the popular Abyss and Darkness setting. In the first DLC we find, for example, the Millwood Greatbow, and its description talks about an Abyss Dragon. Also we have the Untended Graves, and maybe they want to explore its story further. Connected to that, we could visit Londor, since Ashes of Ariandel is directly connected to the Sable Church of Londor, with Friede being Uria's sister, and we probably meet Darkstalker Case, the Master of Uria, again. Even though a bit unlikely, a Dark Souls version of a medieval Japanese setting. In the first Dark Souls, we can find the character Shiva of the East and also armor and weapons from that region, like the katana weapons. Maybe this could also be a little response to the upcoming Souls-like game Neo. What makes that somewhat plausible is that Dark Souls 3 has tons of references to the first Dark Souls, and in the first DLC you even explore the secret level from the first game further, so maybe they want to expand it more, and why not try it with that mysterious region, the East, we have heard so much about. Also, there are tons of ancient weapons that aren't in the game yet, so there is at least potential for equipment. Another interesting idea is somewhat horrific rotten mushroom world. We see in Ashes of Ariandel these rotten places. In the context of a painting, I know how to interpret this, and maybe this amped up could be very unusual and also a bit disgusting and horrifying, like this pit from the first DLC. A setting that is quite unusual for Souls would be a jungle setting. Elements I relate to jungle are things like, for example, Mayan ruins, like we can see in the Crown of the Sunken King DLC from the second Dark Souls, and snakes or serpents. An interesting hint for that could be that very strange serpent statue in Friede's and Ariandel's boss room. Maybe it could be related to the men serpents from Dark Souls 1, but I could also overinterpret things a bit. I don't want to throw out too many ideas, but if you have some interesting theories for potential settings for the second DLC, feel free to share them down in the comments. The last point of my speculation video would be the release date. As mentioned, the long development time could mean a longer DLC or a more unique but work-intensive setting. This would explain why we haven't heard anything yet, but what are possible release dates? If I look at my releases 2017 spreadsheet, I feel like it wouldn't be smart to release it in February or March at all, because several big titles are coming out there, like the mentioned Neo, For Honor, Halo Wars 2, even though it's a totally different genre, Horizon Zero Dawn, Nier Automata, Ghost Recon Wildlands, the big Mass Effect Andromeda, and another big one, the Nintendo Switch launch, with most likely a new Zelda. So either release it a bit prior to this or far later. I also had the crazy idea that maybe the Nintendo Switch launches with a Dark Souls 3 Complete Edition including both DLCs, but I doubt it. If they want to release it prior to this big release block, I would say the first week of February would be the best date, in which case we should hear about the DLC within the next week. If not, then maybe in March, a week before Mass Effect Andromeda. Obviously, it's also a possibility that Bandai Namco doesn't care, but I think they will consider the date carefully. Shouldn't we hear about the DLC within the next week, they will probably go for it within the first 2 weeks of March or even later, which would be very strange, to be honest. And this wraps up my video. It's a bit speculative, even for my taste, to be honest, but if guesstimated right, I can say called it. When we get a trailer, I will make again a new episode of Guesstimating and look how far off I was. Also, right now there is not much going on, so a good time for some speculation, I guess. Next Friday we have the Nintendo Switch presentation, and if something interesting happens, I will for sure make a video about it. Also, thank you for the nice comments and messages I got on some of my last videos. Much appreciated. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you are interested in more, you know what to do. Thank you for watching and goodbye.